Hi, I'm Tom Jenin with a view on ad tech today. It's no secret that SSPs have evolved into demand partners that really have moved them away from providing technology that comprehensively solves publisher needs in a demand agnostic way. Today, we're talking with one company that fills that gap. Niels Linde is the CEO and founder of Assertive Yield, and we'll dive into their latest innovation, Pre-Bid Server, and the impact that it's having on publishers' bottom lines. Niels, great to have you today.
Thank you very much for having me, Tom.
I was wondering, what has Assertive Yield now developed to address publisher revenue needs?
So for Assertive Yield, we take a holistic picture overall on the publisher's needs and always from the perspective of a publisher. At the same time, we are working with a publisher in an unbiased, basically partnership, in the sense of that we, from our end, are not bringing any demand, but at the same time, we're optimizing it holistically to drive the highest potential revenue for the combined amount of revenue the publisher can achieve. And we do that in multiple ways. On one end, it starts with very granular and sophisticated data. On the other hand, we have developed machine learning systems that are able to predict certain events and revenue coming in very precisely. But they've gotten so sophisticated that they have already predicted over $1 billion in revenue, basically. And then at the same time, we are able to basically capture everything that is happening and optimize the complete ad delivery on the page. So it's really, from our perspective, a complete picture as to what should happen at what point in time, to what prices, and so on.
So what of that is different compared to what else has been going on in the industry?
So for us, a lot of the focus has been on the machine learning side of it itself. So we come from a data-driven perspective. We build one of the most granular solutions in the market in terms of tracking what is going on. And with that, gained a very deep understanding as to what effects have what kind of outcomes. And using this experience in combination then with the data science side of it to really dig down and optimize things. And to not just stop at optimizing the performance on one scenario, but constantly reinventing and re-engineering these kind of optimizations so that they can deal really well with different scenarios with a constantly changing landscape.
And does the algorithm do that all on its own?
It's always a combination of basically manually helping it and optimizing it, but over the years it became more and more automated, and it's more and more capable of dealing with these changes and automatically detecting them and readjusting and retuning itself. Because we don't have unlimited time to really constantly adjust it.
Yeah. When did you start building this algorithm? Is it just one algorithm, by the way, or is it many?
It's multiple or many algorithms in general that are tuning all of it. And for different use cases, it's often also a combination of different algorithms that deal and manage different scenarios. Because one algorithm might be dealing really well with something like a Black Friday, while another algorithm is better for when the performance is quite static or quite stable. It initially started like the data tracking side and so on goes back to like 2017. Mm-hmm. But all of the machine learning, it started around 2020 or end of 2019. That is when we have really been focusing on how can we turn this data into outcomes that will generate more revenue for the publisher.
Sometimes when I talk to people about Assertive Yield, I tend to look at it from the product development almost as a linear progression. First, the company built its analytics package, which was innovative and more complete than a lot of the other analytics packages on the market. But then once the analytics were there, somehow you had to make it easier for publishers to take advantage of that data into optimizations that would be more automated. And so you built the wrapper, and you built it as a client-side wrapper because you could get more data and make use of the analytics. But then once you understood all of the demand that was coming through based on the optimizations, then it made sense to make dynamic flooring one of those optimizations. Dynamic flooring was an outgrowth of understanding which bidders were going to bid and how much they were going to bid when they did. But once you understood that, you also knew who wasn't going to bid. So traffic shaping made a lot of sense at that point. Is that kind of how you look at your progression?
Yeah, pretty much. Like we really went from the analytic stage to machine learning automation, then following with the wrapper and so on, step by step, really like trying on one end, like we have this very sophisticated, real-time, very granular data set. But it's not only the revenue information, but it is also engagement information, core vitals, web performance, like really like holistic picture of what is going on. So it's relevant for pretty much every team there is within a publisher. The product team can use it, the AdOps team can use it, RevOps team can use it, finance team can use it. It's really like bringing everything together under one platform and having one data source to basically reference. So we can agree on this is like the story.
Yeah, even the editorial teams can understand not just the traffic to a page, but also the value of that page for advertisers. So they may or may not want to take advantage of that information, but it's there for them for the first time.
Yeah. And then having all of this data available, of course, like we need to put time in to make use of it. Of course, we have alerts and other things that automatically in real time let us know when something goes wrong or there's an opportunity. But in any case, we need to put time in to get value out of it. So sitting on this very vast pool of data that is very granular and very accurate in its nature, it made sense to start seeing, okay, what can we do automatically to reduce the amount of time someone would need to spend working with the data to get results? How can we generate those results automatically? Which is when where traffic shaping was born, where dynamic flooring was born, where supply shaping was born. But then at the same time, we still want to make certain things manually because not everything can be automated. It's always like, I don't think there's any kind of system that is able to really operate at its full potential fully automatically. It's always a combination of manually optimizing in combination with a machine to get to the best results. And a lot of the optimization we want to do requires, when speaking to the engineering team, getting that translated and so on, and probably testing it, evaluating it. And it's a very long process. So the next organic evolution step for us was, okay, we should make it simple to make those changes. We should make it very easy to analyze those changes and produce accurate data on them. So that is where we then build basically the complete revenue management system, which is a wrapper, which is a tag management, everything that basically it controls everything that happens on the page related to advertisements. In some cases, even the layout.
Well, because there's so much that can be done, do you find that publishers need additional hands to make best use of it? Or do they need, or actually, can they do even more with fewer?
It can go in both directions. Because on one hand, of course, they need less resources to do the same stuff. But on the other hand, all of a sudden they can do a lot more, and they want to do a lot more, because now it's no longer as tiresome, no longer as annoying to do something, because you can do it in a few minutes to an hour. So all of a sudden there's like, instead of testing one thing a month, you want to test 20 things a month.
And until quite recently, you were building this in as a wrapper-based client-side solution. What prompted the shift to server-side?
So when we integrate from a wrapper perspective, it is in general like the perfect integration, because we are in control of everything that is happening. Where on the page should the ads show up? At what point in time? What is the right lazy loading offset? What is the right prefetching? And so on. Everything we can control. So it's the way we can achieve the highest potential uplift and also have the most holistic control and optimization potential. But when we integrate from a wrapper perspective, it is kind of like ripping out everything that is there and re-implementing it. So it is not something that can be done like in a day. It is a longer process, and the more sophisticated a publisher is, or the more tools and things a publisher is using, the longer it can take. It's usually still relatively quick, and it can be done anywhere from like a week to a month, but it is still a considerable amount of resources that need to be put in.
Yeah, it feels like that, just like we said in the beginning, there's been a huge gap in publisher-focused, demand-agnostic technology, such that publishers, especially the bigger publishers, have had to build their own to fill that gap. But now you come along and you've really spent years building out technology that fills that gap specifically, and it's your only job. And so, of course, it seems like it would probably work better. but at the same time, it's got to be a big lift for publishers to rip out what they've done before. I can see how that works. So is that one of the goals of Prebid Server, is to try and make it an easier task?
It kind of is, because with Prebid Server itself, on one end, of course, step-by-step things are moving server-side. So it is the logical direction to go in. But then for us, it was also, at some point, we started providing these kind of algorithms and this machine learning also to SSPs, where it would be running server-side. And even that we have been doing since around 2021. So we have also gained very strong sophistication within doing this stuff server-side. So it became a logical step that when we decided, okay, we want to also run auctions server-side, or we want to move them server-sided, as that is where we are heading with the cookies going away and so on, to integrate these optimization server-side. So we used all of these sophistication gains and all of these improvements we have built over the years for SSPs and for publishers, and basically put it on top of a Prebid server. So in the end, we now have a Prebid server itself that in general is more or less like running the auction, taking care of the privacy things and a few other things, but primarily running the auction. And we now enriched it with the machine learning stuff we have been doing for the publisher client side for a long time and have been doing for SSP server side.
So how long would it take for a publisher who implements this? Because it doesn't take long to implement, right? You just said could do it in a day.
Yeah.
And so how long would it take for them to start seeing some benefit?
Yeah, the really nice thing with a server-side integration is that it can be run alongside within the existing stack. Of course, we will only be able to improve this kind of one piece of the entire puzzle.
Yes, not the wrapper.
Yeah,
so.
But we can already generate significant results there. And for a publisher, it's a relatively easy lift, because all they have to do is pretty much, the integration is quite simple to integrating a new bidder in the stack. But there's not even the need to update SOTXT records, because again, like we are unbiased, we don't bring any demand, we purely work and basically help the publisher optimize what they already have. So we squeeze out more out of the demand partners they already work with. And the integration, oftentimes it can be anywhere from like 30 minutes, if a publisher can quickly make those changes, or like within a day, and they are live and running with it. Now, seeing the results, initially, we can already see in real-time effects of it. But then over the course of roughly 1 week, we can see how basically after 1 week, it reaches roughly like peak performance. There's a bit of a warm-up time as the SSPs and so on have to learn about this kind of like new path to buy inventory. And the reason also behind that is that on one end, we are setting floor prices. On the other hand, we are shaping the traffic. So we cut out requests that are not really interesting for the SSP. We try to focus on sending the requests that will actually have the possibility of winning in the end and generating revenue to the right SSPs. And it takes SSPs time to learn that. So they're not going to see that within a few minutes. They're only going to see it over a few days that this path of buying is very clean, for which we then are also able to tap into inventory that before was kind of untouched.
So that's the traffic shaping benefit from implementing the Prebid server, that you're going to send the right, you're going to know who is going to bid and how much they're going to bid. So you can actually send only the traffic, only the bid requests to people who are going to actually provide something of value to the publisher. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so how do you know that which bidders are going to bid and how much they're going to bid?
So in the beginning, we know from the data we have from other publishers already running it. But at the same time, of course, we gather information specifically about the new publisher that just integrated it. And as the data is ramping up, we then prioritize for the predictions of this given publisher their own data, of course. Because there's always some variance between the different seed IDs and the different domains and so on.
So is that contextual? Is that based on the page, or what is that based on?
So from our perspective, we kind of got to the point where it's quite sophisticated in the sense of that we are creating user profiles. So for every single user that is visiting the domain, we are starting to create a small profile on. And we learn historic information about that user. Now, over time, we are assigning that user to different segments. And then through all of this basically combination of things, we're able to get very close to, as close as we basically can be to like an accurate prediction. And this is also what was built over those many years, like iteration after iteration after iteration. How can we be as precise as possible? on one hand, we might say we don't care about the user because the cookie is going away anyway, but there will be alternatives.
Right.
There are already alternatives to that. So for us, it's very important that we do understand the user, that we do understand the user's performance, and that we are also able to understand the user's performance if we have never seen that user before, but being able to have a lookalike information available for that given user.
So how else can you use that information to impact publisher revenue positively?
On one hand, it is, of course, shaping the traffic, making sure that the highest value inventory goes to the SSPs, which then results in being able to influence the decision of the SSPs on if they're going to run an auction for it and how many DSPs have actually included in that auction. Because quite often, like an auction size is somewhere around 4 to 8 bidders, although a SSP is working with hundreds, at least the big ones. But when there are also auctions where only one bidder is included. So it's really the optimization of the SSP. And from being very close to the publisher and seeing the full picture of what is going on, we're able to predict way more precisely as to what is interesting for which partner, and then be more precise in cutting it and basically preparing the food for the SSP so that they can more easy consume it.
Okay.
But then on the other side, for example, we are setting the floor prices. And on the floor pricing side, it is a lot about being able to predict what is the demand partner willing to pay for the inventory and what is the value of the inventory.
So all demand partners, you're going to understand how much they're willing to pay for every single auction before the auction happens. Is that right?
Yeah. So for every single auction, and even for each creative size part of that auction, and for each placement part of that auction, we are predicting what is the likely selling price for that inventory for that given moment, with an understanding, we just moved from one month to the next one, so there's a normal market drop in performance. Or we are just moving towards the end of a month, so we already know that the revenue is going up.
I see. So that dynamic flooring is that sounds like something that other people have offered. How is ours different?
There's many different ways of doing the dynamic flooring. For us, really, the focus has been on using that granular data with those precise predictions to come as close as possible to the price point the market is going to pay for that inventory, and then figuring out what is the right level of aggressiveness to set the floor price, which depends on how close our prediction is to the likely outcome. So for example, we could say, okay, the floor price with a 50% probability, the closing bid will be between $1.20 and $1.45. Now we need to decide where do we put the floor price here. And that depends on how precise we are in the prediction, but also understanding how precise we are in that moment. So the more we know about a user, the more precise we can become, and the more aggressive we can become in setting the floor price. And that's one side of what we do really well. But on the other side, it is also understanding that there are different strategies that work 1 week, and the next week a different strategy is working. There's one strategy that works better on iOS, a different one that works better on Android, per country, per time of the day, and so on. So also when we test all of these different strategies, understanding at what point in time for what segment of traffic do we need to switch the strategy that is being used the most to keep the uplift as at the peak.
So in addition to, the dynamic flooring sounds really interesting. All of this seems to be based on the original analytics that you've been working on from the very beginning. Are those analytics available in Prebid Server as well?
So when we run Prebid Server, we primarily include the Prebid specific analytics, so that both the publisher and us can see what is going on, not only on the server side, but also with the client-side auction still, because not every single bid is supporting server-side yet. And at the same time, there are some bidders the publisher might prefer to keep client-side. And this data is then, of course, being used primarily to analyze it. It is available in real time, and it is available with a very low granularity, and it even supports custom data being pushed into it as well. So it's not only any kind of testing we are doing and optimizations we are doing we can break the data out on. It's also any kind of test the publisher is doing and performing, so that we can understand what is the incremental impact of this Prebid server in combination to other tests and optimizations the publisher is running.
So it sounds like a lot of this is all being based on the actual data that Assertive Yield is able to determine from the auctions, from the publishers' websites. How does this? It doesn't sound like it's very cookie based. So how does this set them up for more of a cookieless future?
In terms of cookieless future in general, we do have identity integration server side. So a lot of the identity solutions that are basically available can work server side. Of course, they also will work automatically out of the box if they are running client side, but we're adding more and more to the server side as well. To give one example, if we are optimizing or basically running on AMP inventory, right now we can't use any identity solutions. So a lot of like the bad performance we see on AMP traffic is because we can't do anything for identity in terms of iOS traffic. But then when we are running these server-side auctions and have server-side integrations of identity, now all of a sudden we can use them. And it's a similar kind of like case when we look at in-app inventory. When we no longer have a device ID, being able to use those server-side now opens up possibilities that before we were limited in those specific inventory types.
And what kind of revenue impact do you see with that kind of identity solution?
It depends on the identity solution in the AMP the publisher wants to activate. But when we look at iOS specifically, seeing north of 15% lift is very common. In many cases, it's even north of 30%. Of course, at this point, it does include ID bridging solutions, but transparently being submitted through EIDs and so on.
And that's all within the control of the publisher in any case. They can pick and choose which ID solutions or aspects of it they'd like to use.
Pretty much, yes, yeah.
And so going forward, what do you recommend for publishers who are concerned about their future revenues?
So from a publisher's perspective in regards to future revenue, it is paramount on one end to really, in my opinion, squeeze out what is possible from the open market, to not be left behind there. There's a lot of sophistication which we can find from those publishers that have the development resources available, that are able to have 5-10 engineers just working on edtech solutions. Similar with like the big sales houses. But then when we are like a mid-sized publisher or even a big publisher with limited resources, we just can't get to that level of sophistication. So there's double digits of revenue we are leaving on the table from the open market. At the same time, it is of course the shift towards building more and more of a direct business, but also building out the identity stack so that we can capture as much as possible from right now the iOS inventory, the Firefox inventory. But as we know, it's getting more and more that will be without cookies.
Yeah. So it's most important right now to get a really clear sense of what is possible and to how much revenue can be extracted out of your current stack. And then so that you can establish the right bar for all of your direct spend. So obviously, if you're making more money from programmatic, then you obviously are going to charge even more for your direct because you know where that essential floor is. Is that right?
Yeah, correctly. And most publishers never fully sell out directly. So you always have this portion of inventory, and sure, you can push up the prices, but you might not even need to, because 5% more on open auction, 10% more, 15% more is still some money to the bottom line.
So in publishers' cookieless traffic today, they're very often seeing not full sell-through. In fact, they may not sell half of their cookieless traffic today at all. Do you see an uptick in the amount of sell-through that publishers are seeing?
When they work with these identity solutions, definitely. Like the fill rate goes not back to like the Android levels, but it's not far off. And also the CPMs we see, like with all of the identity solutions integrated, at least like for US inventory and some other countries. Unfortunately, there's not too much possible on the European market. It gets like within sometimes 20% of Android performance.
So looking at Prebid Server, you'd say that overall, what would your revenue expectation be if you were a publisher implementing Assertive Yield's Prebid Server? What would you like to see? So
when we integrate Prebid Server across publishers, and it doesn't really matter what kind of publisher, It could be one that is purely open auction, programmatic, or it can be one that is 40% direct, let's say. But one story we always see is that the amount of revenue that comes from pre-bid as one of the revenue channels is oftentimes increasing by double digits in the 20, 30, sometimes 40% range. So it's a huge increase. Of course, it depends on how sophisticated already the client-side auctions are, and if there's already flooring running there and so on, which can reduce it a bit. But it's still like a significant lift. And then if you look at it on a holistic picture, let's take, for example, a publisher that is running only open auction with like 20, 30, 40% lift on pre-bid alone results in an overall increase of usually around 15%. So with Ad Exchange and Amazon and everything included, 15% lift just for moving bidders from client side to server side in order to utilize these optimizations is a pretty significant impact. And of course, the even better step would be running those integrations also client side,
right,
to capture the entire, holistically everything that is going on, in which case it can go way beyond 20%. But purely with this very simple integration of moving stuff server side and being able to utilize all of these machine learning based optimizations, we can already achieve such significant lift for basically nothing in terms of integration work.
And what do you think demand partners think of all this work that you're doing to help publishers make more money? You think they're slightly unhappy about having to pay more for their inventory?
So you mean like the advertiser specifically, or you mean more the middleman, SSP, DSP?
Probably more the middle, yeah.
I don't think it makes any difference for them. They take their margin, usually a revenue share, and the advertising spend that is on the market remains more or less the same. One thing that is, of course, happening is that the optimizations we do have varying effects on different partners. For some of them, we can squeeze out more. For others, we can squeeze out less. To give one example, if an SSP is applying traffic shaping on their end, meaning they are making the decision on if they drop the incoming request or if they run an auction, and how many DSPs to include, quite often they use the floor price that is coming in as like one of the decisioning factors. But if they only look at the floor price unrelated to where the floor price is coming from, they might quite often make the decision not to run an auction because they assume it's like a static floor, or it's like a floor that doesn't have much precision behind it. And then they are missing out because another SSP that is submitting it and sending it through is benefiting from us being so good at predicting what is the right floor price for that given auction.
So do you think that overall it kind of pushes demand partners to see more value in that publisher?
Definitely. Especially with the traffic shaping that is running, where we are cutting down requests. So the SSP in the end is receiving overall less traffic, but what they are receiving is basically the traffic they can transact on. That is improving what they look at like an auction RPM, meaning how much revenue do we as an SSP generate per million auctions, for example, per partner, per seed ID. And that is, of course, heavily improving as we filter the traffic and optimize and cut out the stuff I don't care about.
Right. So demand partner wins because they see more of the quality traffic that they want to see. And the publisher wins because they sell more of the traffic that they want to sell and at a higher price. And so ultimately, it kind of is a rising tide and all the boats are floating. Is that right?
Yeah. We don't necessarily see more of that inventory because we can't just create new inventory. But they primarily see that better portion of inventory, so which they care about.
They would see more inventory if they were throttling down that inventory in the past, right?
Yeah.
And then they decided to turn more of it on because it's efficient.
Yeah. So when the SSP is seeing, traffic coming from this publisher through this server-side integration is like 200 times more clean than what we receive client-side or even on the open market, then the SSP is inclined, of course, to run a lot more auctions for that publisher and include more bidders in those auctions, especially if those predictions are already better than what they can do internally, because they have more data available, a more holistic picture of what is happening on the publisher's end. And also because the model that is kind of predicting everything there can really focus on that one publisher instead of like thousands, tens of thousands of publishers.
So when you look at the competitive set, how many other companies are offering something a lot like this?
If we look specifically at Prebid Server, there's a lot of companies that offer it, and it has been around for many, many years. What makes a big difference from the sort of yield solution is that on one end, we are not an SSP. We also don't plug in any of our demand. So everything we do is really squeeze out more with what you already have. So there's no way we can make any kind of money in the back door otherwise. It's really like we are fully focused on taking what you have and optimizing it. And then on the other hand, the machine learning stuff we have built over the years and the optimization we have built over the years, it really goes back like 4 or 5 years, where we have focused on how do we do this floor price prediction? How do we figure out what is the right floor price to set? What is the right strategy to use in different cases? Where should we cut traffic? Where should we not cut traffic, and so on?
So our methodology, the assertive yield methodology, that includes the really sophisticated machine learning and the fact that it's so easy to implement makes that kind of a no-brainer for publishers to put into place and to give it a try. And they'll find out within a few days whether or not it's right, and then they can turn it off or keep going. Is that about right?
Yeah, it's pretty much investing half an hour to a day, depending on how efficient it is to integrate something like this, similar to integrating a new bidder, letting it run for a few days, analyzing results. And in the majority of cases, we should see 10-15% overall lift, not just Prebid overall.
So then, a lot of publishers have been out there today turning off bidders, right? Turning off different demand partners. Maybe they're resellers. Maybe they just want to get a better score from carbon rating agencies. In this case, it sounds like now that they've done that, with Prebid Server from Assertive Yield installed, they would be able to try out new demand partners and see if they make any sense. Is that right?
Yeah, it's right. There's, of course, a big question here. As we all know, they all send it to the same DSPs in the end. Some of them have those relationships directly. Some of them are reselling other SSPs. And then in the end, we are hitting the same SSP even multiple times, one directly and once through resellers and another time through, say, Amazon TAM and Open Bidding and everything else there is, which is creating a lot of inflated inventory, basically, which then results in the traffic shaping being more aggressive for that given seed. But at the other side, it also gives more opportunities in terms of getting through to the DSP and getting through frequency capping and other things that are kind of like barriers. So it's a double-edged sword, kind of.
So it sounds like even though in the past it has been a real problem for both buyers and sellers to have too many demand partners plugged in, with Prebid Server and the traffic shaping that's available, since there's going to be some intelligence behind the choices that are made automatically, that putting in a different demand provider, one that may have something unique to offer, there's no risk anymore because the demand providers are going to see what they see based on what the logic presents.
Yeah, we could plug in more or less as many as we want. Of course, there's still kind of like a soft limit we want to maintain. Also in terms of who do we want to work with, how likely are they that they're going to pay us long-term and so on, how healthy is that company, and how direct are the paths to the demand partners, what are the discrepancies, what are the payment terms, how quickly do they pay us, how often do they deduct stuff, all these kind of things. And then advertising quality, how well do they filter the inventory, many, many layers we want to consider there. But when we say, for example, client side, we would put a limit on 5 or 8 bidders or something in that range. With server side, it doesn't really matter. We could run the auction with 20, with 30, with 40. But the moment we use so many, it really, especially when we will have resellers in there. So we will have resellers that are hitting PubMatic, same as we're hitting them directly and all of the other big SSPs. And at that point, we really want to make sure that we have some kind of traffic shaping in there so that our score for this given domain and for this given seed and so on is not becoming completely low value and being way below the average. So
sounds fair. What's next? What's next beyond Prebit Server?
So for us with Prebit Server, it's overall big focus point still optimizing it, still growing it, and so on. By now, the traffic shaping, the flooring, and so on, that stuff is integrated quite well and working really well, but there are still steps to improve it further. And also to give a publisher more control on how they want to integrate it and being able to make changes themselves. Right now, we make a lot of the decisions for the publisher, and we can make adjustments for the publisher. But in the end, we want the publisher to have the option, for example, to decide how clean do I want to be with the auction? What level of potential revenue loss am I willing to take to send half as many requests out, for example? So to be very aggressive with how we are throttling or what we are sending out to be more green? Or do I want to be basically only cut out what doesn't cost me any revenue? These kind of level of controls in combination then, of course, with identity and other things.
So where would you say is some of the good successes? Who would you say is really delivering? Who would you say is using the Assertive Yield platform to the best of its ability?
So it's a tricky question. Of course, we have people on the customer success side that have a lot of experience using it and have a lot of experience also like what kind of optimizations make sense and what works and what outcome to expect. So for them, it's easy to use it to its almost full potential. For a publisher, quite often it's used by multiple people. On one hand, we have product people using it, making technical changes to it, measuring what is the impact of changes we do to our product or our website. On the other hand, we have the RevOps people really figuring out, okay, each test and everything we are running, what is the impact? What makes sense? So it's really, it depends from publisher to publisher. And oftentimes it's also a collaboration between the publisher and us, for example. So the publisher comes with ideas, we come with ideas, and we design a roadmap as to what should we test at what point in time, what has the highest potential for uplift, and makes sense to integrate at what step.
Can you talk a little bit about the support that a publisher would get working with Assertive Yield?
So the support, in general, depends on what the publisher is looking for. We are not really doing any kind of like full white glove service in the sense of that we do everything, including demand. We are really positioned to the point where we never bring demand because we want to be fully unbiased. But then some publishers do everything internally and only ask certain product questions when they're getting stuck. And other publishers, we have a call with every single week, or even multiple times a week, and they just overlook the data, the performance, and make the final decisions. In many cases, we even bring all of the recommendations on what to do.
Sounds like it's really easy to get started and really easy to get the most use out of it. I know you've got a big event tomorrow. What kind of comments do you think you're going to get from publishers? What do you think is going to be their biggest concerns? What are publishers going to be talking about tomorrow?
I think it's a lot about the general state of the industry. It's no secret that overall it's basically the industry as a general is shrinking. If you look at like the open web, on one end, the traffic has already been down from social media for a long time. Now search traffic is going down. Basically the amount or like the traffic sources publishers can have are becoming way less. At the same time, it's of course, it means that everyone that was able to already build a direct relationship with the reader is in a good position. But also for those, it's more difficult now to maintain that readership and to gain new readership. So in general, for the industry that has already been through the COVID period and afterwards, on one end, COVID period being very good in terms of like more traffic and more revenue and so on, especially during the second half. But on the other hand, now with everything going back to reality, or having gone back to reality, it has created an even bigger shift, or like kind of rift between reality and the state the publishers were operating at. So I think a big topic is, as it is very imminent right now, as to what are the right steps or what is the right direction for this entire industry, and how as a publisher are we positioning ourselves the proper way. On one end, to be able to stay relevant, stay sizable, keeping readership levels and volumes we have going as much as we can, but at the same time then also still remaining and being able to deal with all of the changes happening to the industry. Like on one end, like it's getting more and more difficult in terms of overall traffic, in terms of monetization. But then at the same time, we have these huge changes happening within the industry, with the cookie going away, overall privacy-related topics and other parts of it, which are really like, are core fundamental changes to it.
So do you have recommendations for publishers? If you were a publisher today, where would you be investing this money that assertive yield pre-bid server is going to make them? Where would you reinvest that money?
I think I would really try to invest it in the part where improving the reader
experience.
Not necessarily experience, but basically retention.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that these readers are coming back as much as possibly can, having the right loop mechanism in place that recaptures the readership.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, seeing how can we, with the changing landscape where social traffic is very difficult to not existent, where search traffic is becoming very difficult to non-existent potentially, how can we kind of remain relevant in terms of driving new readers coming in? But then at the same time, and probably the biggest part, is making the entire organization as efficient as it can be and flexible, so that as the change is coming and as we know where we are heading, we are able to jump on that wagon as quickly as we can and capture as much of it as possible. So preparing to be as dynamic as possible to the changes that are coming.
Mm. Yeah, it feels like there's quite a lot of. It feels like there's quite a lot for any publisher to consider. At the same time that they're uncertain about what next year's revenues are going to bring, it's hard for them to consider what kinds of investments to make and how many people they can hire, or if they can hire anyone, how they can reallocate some of the resources they currently have into new opportunities. So I can imagine that that's going to be a lot of the conversation around what are they going to do. And even the people in the room, it's there's always a lot of conversations that we have around people who are programmatically focused. Programmatic certainly isn't going away, but there's been a lot of conversation around direct demand, especially when they see that from the marketers and from the DSPs, there's a lot of interest in having more deals in place. So it feels like there's quite a lot of, for any publisher, there's a lot for them to consider. Is there, when you were a publisher, and that was not too long ago, you started a game site, right?
I was basically operating multiple online communities. Mm-hmm. So kind of like similar to like a Reddit, I would say. Some was in the gaming space. Some were more about automotives, motorcycles, and so on. Mm-hmm. Primarily in these two verticals.
Was that fun? Was it fun being a publisher?
It was fun for me because I'm technical, and it was a time when basically Prebid came out. So there was a lot of stuff to figure out, integrate, and basically invent and build around it. Mm-hmm. But in general, even at that point in time, it was already like we made the experience that from one day to another, one of our main sales house was acquired and decided, okay, we're gonna keep everything in-house from now on, in terms of like all of the direct spend, which for us meant like 1/3 to a quarter, or even in some cases 1/5 of the revenue 4/5 of the revenue disappeared. So yeah, it had a significant impact. And right now, of course, everything is a bit more predictable. We can already see what is the performance impact on Chrome traffic of the cookies going away. It's somewhere around 30%, which is way better than what it is on iOS. Primarily since advertisers are just focusing on Android. And SSPs are optimizing for Android inventory because they can capture more revenue from that than from iOS. So the amount of iOS inventory a DSP is seeing is way less than there is actually on the market. So it even makes it difficult for a buyer to buy iOS inventory. But was 30%, will they be going back up the moment the cookie alternative or like the cookie is fully away? Or will it remain on that level? What will happen as the traffic is overall going down? Does it mean the prices go up or will they remain the same? Will the market become irrelevant for some of the buyers? Where they say it's actually not even worth it to spend 10-20% on open market programmatic? It's a lot of questions.
Yeah, but that's what makes this industry fun. There's always more problems to solve, and really innovative people who can, turn their brains to solving those problems. So it's really great that you're in the industry because we really need more of that brain power.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niels. It's been great having you here. Please tune in for our next episode, and please do subscribe and like and write in the comments. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tom. It was a pleasure.